stained glass window. It's a double layer of serous membrane connecting the parietal and visceral peritoneum. And this is called, it's the mesentery of the colon, so we just shorten and say mesocolon. Pretty easy, right?
That's the mesentery of the large intestine?
Yep. The colon is another name for large intestine. And the vessels, again, I can see what's called your inferior mesenteric arteries and veins in there that you'll be learning later on. That's on the second page of this handout. So, nice and packaged. We also have a specific name for the mesentery of the duodenum. The duodenum is the first part, the proximal part of the small intestine. In the rabbit, I would say it's about 4 or 5 inches long at most. It forms a gentle U-shaped curvature, and that mesentery is called, what would you guess? Mesoduodenum. It's the mesentery of the duodenum. Here it is in the cat. In the cat, it's a little clearer, and the cat's duodenum is a little longer. I would say it's this gentle U-shaped portion. And the advantage of the cat, again, is that you can see the pancreas. It's sealed in there like seal-a-meal. It's grayish-brown, lobular. Glandular tissues tend to be lobular, okay? They broke it up into little units. And that is the head of the pancreas that you find in the mesoduodenum. You can also see a major blood vessel, a major vein called the hepatic portal vein in there too. Okay, so those are 2 items that you can find in the mesoduodenum of the cat. Okay. Now, if we start at the top of the abdominal cavity, I'll come back to the others later. Here's the stomach. And this part of the small intestine, the first part is called the duodenum. And then the next part is the jejunum. And what I'll do there is say, it's this curly fry part, right? It's starting to curl around. So there's no distinct boundary. So we'll just say, if it's beyond the gentle U-shaped portion and it's in this curly section, that's the jejunum. Now, the last part of the small intestine is called the ileum. Again, there's no definitive dividing line. It's a histological distinction. So how am I going to label that? I'm going to stick a pin close to the end of the ileum, the last couple inches before the large intestine. So, ileum. Now, we cannot distinguish the two in gross anatomy, so we don't have a mesojejunum and a mesoileum. We just call this the mesentery. There are some lymph nodes there. Now, the beginning of the large intestine in the cat is very simple. It's an expanded upper end of it called the cecum. And the cat cecum is identified by this, recognizable by this beak-like portion right here. It looks like a parrot's beak. And where the ileum joins the cecum, that's where there's a one-way valve called the ileocecal valve. I didn't put it on this list because we weren't using cats sufficiently then. I'm going to add it for next semester. Of course, they get the swimming pool, so that's a joke. But anyway.
Is that at the end of the small intestine?
Yeah, you need to know this for lecture. There's a valve there, a one-way valve that normally prevents feces from coming back up into the small intestine, except if you have really bad, GI tract problems. So there's a one-way valve in there. In fact, they've even opened it up on some of these cats. This one's a little better. They opened it up so you could see the sphincter right there. And once you've seen one sphincter, you've seen them all. It looks like the going away sphincter when the little cat's walking away from you with its tail up. Looks like an anus. All the sphincters look like that. It's a puckered muscular valve. Okay, now there are other valves. At the beginning of the stomach, there's a lower esophageal valve called the cardiac sphincter that normally prevents stomach contents from coming up in the esophagus, except when you're vomiting, driving the porcelain bus after too much drinking, right? Then at the lower end of the stomach, this is the pyloric region of stomach, there's another one-way valve. These things will be tested. These valves are on the list for the lab, but we'll also have to know them for the lecture. That's called the pyloric sphincter, and that controls the emptying of the stomach contents into the duodenum. So lots of nice things to see.
Is that what, like in stomach, people with stomach ulcers, is that what it?
Well, these are regions that can be ulcerated. The esophageal, the esophagus, if it's being eaten away, you know, if there's a lesion in there, that would be an esophageal ulcer. If it's in the stomach, it's a gastric ulcer. If it's in the duodenum, it's a duodenal ulcer. It can occur anywhere along there. And I'll be talking about that in lecture as well. Now, the pancreas, I showed you the head of the pancreas. There's also a body and a tail, much more visible in the cat. The tail goes all the way over here underneath the spleen. So, the rabbit has a much smaller and less obvious pancreas. And, okay, we look for it in the duodenum. There's just a little bit of brownish tissue there. Sometimes we can see a bit of it. Here it is, going over by the spleen. It's really not very impressive.
That's the pancreas?
Yep, but I could test on that. I'm more likely to use the cat because it's more prominent. So I'll have a lot of rabbits and I'll have a few cats out, and I'll use the cats for things that are really good on the cat. Okay, I'm just going as the order as I see it. I'm not following the list. So we continue with the abdominal cavity. And as I mentioned, the large intestine is very simple in the cat. It consists of this expanded upper end with a beak-like part called the cecum. And there is no appendix on the cat cecum. And then we just have a descending colon that goes into the rectum and anus through the pelvic structure. Very simple, relatively short gut. It's easy to digest meat, okay, with protein. Now the rabbit's another story. Look at all this. What is all this? When we first opened these up, it was a puzzlement. So the stomach is pretty much the same, only larger in proportion to the size of the animal, because it's an herbivore. It has to eat more, it has to take in a greater amount of food because it has a lower nutrient content. So it has a lot of indigestible cellulose in the plants that it eats. So it has to have a larger stomach to store what it eats, and it has to eat more often and for longer periods. And then its duodenum and small intestine aren't too much different. Okay, in fact, I would say they're shorter than the cat. But because, and that portion is where they're going to